Welcome to the latest edition of USC Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. And it's great to have you back with us for another week. And we draw closer to week one against Missouri State. Mississippi State's going to be bad too. That game probably wouldn't have been too much harder than Missouri State. Mississippi State picked at the bottom of the 16-team SEC. Maybe a little bit of a Freudian slip there. But yeah, closer to Missouri State, and plenty to talk about as we, consider preseason camp and the evolution of this team, what coaches are saying, all the things that are part of mid-August football talk. So, Ethan, we're going to start off with the AP poll. We'll talk about USC special teams and kicking game in just a little bit, but the AP poll, 1 week after the coaches poll, and USC excluded from that. I have plenty to say, but your initial impressions of the AP poll and the makeup of it, and just like it's another reminder, the experts don't think USC is going to measure up, so it's free motivation for this team heading into the season.
Yeah, I just think it's, a classic case of, all these media members are basing it on is the last season or the last couple of seasons, right? They obviously haven't seen anything play out this season, and it's not like every sports writer in the country can make it out to every single training camp. So, they're just giving it their best guess based on who's returning and who people got in the transfer portal and stuff. And I think a lot of media members are probably tired of picking USC to finish high and then getting, flamed when they don't. And I think that fatigue is finally kind of caught up with them after 2 straight years of, hey, based on Lincoln Riley's first year, maybe USC will be great, and then them not living up to that. So I think, it's just I'm not super mad about it. I think, kind of like I said last week, USC's been a little bit overrated in recent years, and that's made other fan bases kind of tired of us and, think that we're getting sort of the preferential treatment because we're a big, exciting program in a big market. Media outlets get excited about us every year. So I think it's kind of a little bit refreshing to be underrated for once. And I do think that, in the new 12-team playoff, it's not going to matter all too much when it comes to, you kind of have to win games to get in at this point. It's not like the 4-team playoff where it's a lot harder to get in if you're unranked at the beginning of the season. So I just an opportunity, kind of like you alluded to, for them to really prove themselves. And, no one can accuse USC this year of having been given preferential treatment, the benefit of the doubt, none of that stuff. If they don't win, they're not going to be ranked. And, so they have to go out and win. And I think that this team is equipped to do that. So I'm not too worried about the ranking, but I do think that it's an interesting change. It's a little bit different. I feel like every year since I've rooted for USC, we've had a number next to us. And I think it's something since 2001 or something, Pete Carroll's first year, that we've been ranked every year. So, it's different for sure, but I kind of like being an underdog, and I think it'll benefit USC as well.
Let me just follow up quickly. For some people, USC not being ranked in either of the 2 major preseason polls might just be exhausting, in the sense of, gosh, no one's giving USC any credit. No one's seeing the improved defensive line room. No one's seeing, what Trumaine Carroll is bringing to the table. It can come across as ignorance of what's been happening behind the scenes. That USC clearly has a more professional operation. Chad Bowden, of course, as general manager. So it could come across as people who are paid well to cover this sport. AP voters are just not paying attention. And in that way they're not giving USC due respect. But on the other hand, there's the other side. It's USC just hasn't done well enough on the field the last 2 seasons to merit that trust. Where do you stand on this? And even give a 2-minute answer, because I have to just duck out for 2 minutes, but you can give the crowd here at the Voice of College Football your thoughts on kind of where you fall on that particular tension.
Yeah, I think that, I think you said the last 2 years USC hasn't performed quite well enough for the voters. I really think it's honestly the last 2 decades because, we mentioned Pete Carroll, we mentioned 2001. It's, a long time since that last national championship. And I see Gixer in the chat here said USC was never unranked going into week 1 under Clay Helton. That's true. 2021 was a Clay Helton year and they were top 15, and we all know how that went, 4-8. So I don't think that that's necessarily a credit to Clay Helton that USC was, never unranked. I think that that's another classic case of, people not really doing their homework. And I think USC is a team that a lot of media members want to be good. I mean, obviously USC are the bad guys for a lot of other fan bases, but media members, it's a lot more exciting. It's a lot more, there's a lot more excitement around college football in this big market. There's probably a lot more money to be made when USC is good. So there's a lot of media members that want USC to be good, even though there's a lot of fan bases that, USC is obviously one of the more hated fan bases and things like that. But I also think that a lot of media members are distracted by the 2026 recruiting class as well. And they're so ready for USC to be good next year. And that's kind of been all the headline making for the offseason. It's a lot of what we talked about, in the spring and summer months was another 2026 recruit, another 2026 recruit, another 2026 recruit. That there's almost this complacency that's been developed about this year from some media members where it's as long as Lincoln Riley doesn't, the wheels don't fall off and they don't go 4-8, he'll stick around. And then, that's really what they're gearing up for. And this year is kind of a transition year, I want to say. And really, and then so you don't look at some of the big guys that they brought in on the defensive line because the headline makers are the Mark Bowmans and and Hassan Longstreet starting next year potentially, and all of those different things that make 2026 exciting. And I think that when you are looking forward to 2026 like that, I think that can, cause 2025 to kind of slip just from your vision. And people, I think that's a big reason why too. But it's 2026 being a year where USC is going to have all those advantages for them doesn't discount this year and shouldn't be a reason for media members to ignore this year. So I do think that that's a potential problem. I think that people are just so 2026 focused when it comes to USC, and that's been the big story that people have forgotten to do their homework on 2025.
Okay, our friend Gixer Squid mentions that USC was never unranked going into week 1 under Clay Helton. It obviously brings up the point. Is this media blowback at Lincoln Riley? And it's not necessarily blowback at Lincoln Riley for its own sake, as kind of like to get clicks, to be SEO or Google friendly. It's just that, let's just put it out there. Lincoln Riley is not the most media friendly coach out there. That's not even a criticism. All right. He has a very standoffish attitude toward the press, how he micromanages USC press conferences. Some USC fans think that's great. Put those media members in their place, put them in a box, they don't rule the world, shut them up, humble them. A lot of USC fans think that's fine. Others will disagree. So again, I'm not making a judgment on whether Lincoln Riley's handling of the media is good or bad. That's for other people to decide. But he does not have the best relationship with the media. How much do you think that does play into voters not giving him and USC the benefit of the doubt when things are not going fantastic?
I think that does play into it, actually. That's a really good point. I think it's a combination of that and also just this kind of reputation that Lincoln Riley has developed for, I think the standard is a little bit higher for Lincoln Riley, quote unquote, proving it than other coaches because of just the great situation he was handed at Oklahoma. I think especially after the way the last couple of years have gone, media members want to, the prove it has kind of reset and people are starting to second guess whether, his Oklahoma success was his success or, due to kind of the situation that he was put in. So I think that's part of it as well, is just that. But I do think the personality has something to do with it. It's not like Lincoln Riley is like constantly going off on the media. It's not like, he's in the headlines every week for something negative that he says about the media, but that standoffish personality is a good point. I think as someone who's been around him a decent bit the last 4 years, it's like I think and around the other USC media members too, which is part of this equation. I think there's a general frustration just between the two parties that I think USC in the last year has really kind of tried to fix a little bit, because just kind of being in some of the press conferences and stuff, 2023 in particular was kind of a disaster of a year for media Lincoln Riley relations, because there was just, I think, the increase in media attention that resulted from 2022, and then just like, disappointment after disappointment, where they started 8-0 and then they just lost most of the rest of those games, or 6-0 rather. Like, there was just so many press conferences where there was just so much, like, I don't know, like, it was just so tense between the players and the media and Lincoln Riley, and it was just like not quite right. And I think last year there's a couple of different things that they did to try to make that better. And I don't think that it's really anybody's fault per se. Like, I don't particularly personally have a really big problem with the way that Lincoln Riley conducts himself with the media, because I think that, with exception of a few instances where I think he was overstepping, I think that generally, he's trying to protect the players, protect the team, protect his schemes from coverage that, might be harmful to them. We still have to remember that these are college students, and we also have to remember that he's trying to win football games, and winning and losing a college football game can be the difference in millions of dollars of revenue. So, like, he has interests at heart that aren't necessarily, negative. And he always speaks very positively about people. He's always very cordial. Like I said, it's not like he's going on some Deion Sanders rant about how, the media's out to get him, and, they're out to slime him or whatever. Like, he always sits up there, he doesn't like skip his media availabilities or anything. So I don't really have any problem with it. I just think that because of like the real careful nature of not letting people into practice. Pete Carroll was not like that, obviously. Pete Carroll let media into practice, and random students and people like that. So it's a bit different than USC fans are used to as well. But I just think, like, generally kind of all of that added together, like the frustrations of 2023, 2024 was better. And then like the just general, like, kind of difference in opinion of how he should conduct himself. I think that there's a lot of older people involved in USC media coverage specifically that think things that kind of remember a bygone era where things were done a different way and it wasn't so secretive, and they get even more frustrated with Lincoln Riley's like very PR, like, hey, this is, I'm going to like protect my players, protect myself, all this kind of stuff. And that, they want more of the nitty gritty answers when USC loses and stuff like that. But like, yeah, like I said, I don't personally have too much of a problem with it because I know what he's after. I just think, but I do think that your point is valid, that there could be a bit of a breakdown between him and the media a little bit, just because of how that's gone. I think he's been a little bit more scrutinized being in LA too, and probably has dealt with a little bit more negative media coverage, which has probably, all the rest of the country is looking at LA's media coverage to determine what they think about USC and stuff. So, and if his relationship with the LA media isn't good, that's going to spread around everywhere. So I just think, like, we're going to see this year that probably continue to get better. I think that, USC realized that 2023 was a bad year for Lincoln Riley media relations, and, things like, I think it was the Washington game. My best story about this is the Washington game ends, right? Very frustrating game. Caleb Williams, that's the game where Caleb Williams ran into the stands and cried, and his mom was there, and that got televised, and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Washington goes on to make the college football playoff, make the national championship game, and the way that post-game media was conducted that game was just so weird. It was like, instead of, because normally how it goes, right, is there's like a main press conference. It's Lincoln Riley and like an offensive star and a defensive star. And then like afterwards they bring in, a handful of different players who media members can choose to individually talk to or not. And that game, they just like brought out everybody at once. And so like at the press conference, there was like 8 or 9 people, including Lincoln Riley and all the players. And like Caleb Williams was like kind of standing in the corner and obviously didn't want to be there because he had a very emotional moment right before that. And that was when the quote about "I want to go home and cuddle my dog and watch some shows" came out too. I just think like there was a lot of different incidents like that where the media was just like, things are being handled a little oddly, and like, some of the frustrations I think of the bad play was spilling over on both sides. But I do stand by it was, not really anybody's fault. I think it was just people on both sides getting frustrated with how USC was playing, because everybody involved obviously wants USC to win. And then, just frustrations also with not really understanding where the other person was coming from. But like I said, last year was better. And I think this year, especially with Lincoln Riley kind of getting over some of that smartest guy in the room syndrome that we talked about, and allowing other people to take on other responsibilities so he doesn't have to feel like he's in charge of everything. He's got a lot of great talkers around him now too. Chad Bowden is an example of someone who's really, really great media person. So I just think he'll be a lot more relaxed, and we won't see those issues quite as much. So
here we go. Let me so Bob Springer, new viewer of the show. Welcome, Bob, making several interesting, informative points in the chat. Bob says Lincoln Riley seems a lot more relaxed and comfortable with the media. Is that basically a Chad Bowden reality, that because Chad Bowden's handling the infrastructure, the off-field stuff, the NIL, that Lincoln Riley thinks he can I could just coach a ball club and let everybody else handle responsibilities? Is it really that simple, or is it a little more complicated?
I think so. I think, like I said, just generally the media relationship has rebounded a little bit. I think that they've recognized that him and the program have made a couple of good moves. The media people have, in terms of rebuilding the program and not getting stuck in his old ways. Bringing in Danton Lynn was obviously a good move that everybody realizes that was a great move. Bringing in Chad Bowden, kind of the way the 2026 recruiting class has been built. I just think he's on like a decent kind of arc of momentum as well, of like, hey, everybody, knows that all of these couple of things that have happened are like pretty universally good things. So I just think especially, I don't think that there's much worse than it could have gotten in 2023, because like you're coming off 2022, you missed the college football playoff by, a Caleb Williams injury and, a couple of better defensive players. And like, and you start 6-0 again, and everybody thinks that you're on that, on that train once again. And then just kind of everything unfolds. It's clear that, Alex Grinch is not up to the job. He's a Lincoln Riley guy. Lincoln Riley's catching a lot of heat for that. And, you're kind of getting accused too of wasting Caleb Williams because of him having a Heisman year. And then, he comes back and plays, pretty much almost as well. He's playing against some a little bit better defenses, and then offensive line is just completely falling apart. And so I just think regressing is like a really stressful position for a coach to be in, and especially when everybody is blaming all of those different massive issues with the program. Like, those weren't just like, you got unlucky because a bunch of players got injured, or you had one specific player do something that was a key player do something off the field that got you suspended or whatever. I think it was like stuff that starts from the top, stuff that so clearly starts with the head coach. And so he couldn't point fingers, and not that he would have pointed fingers anyway, but he couldn't point fingers. There was no blame to deflect on anybody else. It was like, yeah, this is my fault. And so I just think this year they're starting from a place, like we said, AP poll, they're underrated. They're not, the expectations aren't as high. If this year is a bit of a disaster, not a bit of a, if it's a disaster, it's bad. But if it's like, similar to last year, maybe only marginally better, he's probably not going to get fired because of the 2026 recruiting class. That's when the expectations are going to probably kick back in again. And like I said, everybody just recognizes that he's made several good moves in a row. And, they've made a lot of effort, I think, to repair the media relationship. They kind of a lot of ways last year directly to media members tried to show that they were kind of thankful for them and appreciated them for doing their jobs. I remember after a handful of games, they were like, there was like, pizza served courtesy of USC football. So for the media members, just to thank them for the work that they did. So I just think it's just all added together, kind of made this, put him in the spot where he doesn't have to worry as much about how things go this year. And like it's easier for him to be better this year than last year than, to build on 2022 and 2023. And he doesn't have to deal with all those narratives, like I said, that so clearly start with the head coach.
All right, some more comments. Gixxer Squid, here's the truth about USC not being ranked in the AP poll. This is the second year Riley doesn't have a real Heisman contender behind center. Fact, that's why we're not ranked. And then I'm going to mention Yassine Asana. Yassine, thanks for watching our show here at the Voice of College Football. How do you guys feel about USC as a collective on offense and defense? So let's put these things together. How much do you think USC not being ranked is a Jaden Maiava matter, and how does that connect to your feeling about the USC offense? And Yassine, I'm just going to quickly get at your comment. I'm a lot more confident about the defense than the offense, but it's not a Maiava issue. It's I need to see the offensive line become skull crushers, and we just haven't seen it. Now that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but we need to see it, and like it needs to be a thing that happens consistently throughout the season. Like the USC offensive line was pretty solid at the end of last season. Elijah Page came along, other guys on the line came along and evolved, but boy, it took so long for them to all get on the same page. The younger guys needed like half a season to really settle into their roles and begin to feel comfortable. Those early season Big Ten road games, Michigan, Minnesota, they got tripped up. They were not ready. They did not play at an elite level. They also didn't play really all that well at Washington. Certainly in red zone, not good enough. So can USC carry it throughout the whole season? Can it carry it into Big Ten road games on the offensive line? That more than Maiava, because I think if the offensive line comes together, do you really think Jaden Maiava is going to struggle? If he gets pass protection, if there are running lanes, if everything is set up for Jaden Maiava to be able to slow the game down and have enough time to make the right read, I think he's going to be really good. But will he get that time? So I think it's an offensive line issue, Yassine. That's my assessment of the offense. Like that is just the big lingering question. That USC dominated college football because student body right, and because Hudson Houck, one of the great offensive line coaches in the history of the sport of football, was at USC teaching great players and just churning out one first-round pick after another. That's when USC dominated in the McKay Robinson times in the 1970s, and in the Pete Carroll era, you had lots of big dogs, pulling that sled for Lendale White and Reggie Bush. Like it's not as though Lendale White and Reggie Bush were doing everything without any help. No, they had some big uglies up front. So that's my assessment of the USC offense, and also that quarterback question. Like I don't think it's a Jaden Maiava thing in terms of why USC's not ranked. I think it's more Gixxer Squid overall program performance and track record, with the offensive line being a significant part of that piece. But now, Ethan, I turn it over to you. How do you juggle the various things that I've just mentioned based on what you've seen here and also Gixxer Squid have commented on?
I think that it should be an offensive line thing, but I think that it probably is a Jaden Maiava thing, because, let's face it, like so many media narratives are about the quarterback. And we looked at it last week, and, there's so many top ranked Big Ten teams like Penn State and Illinois. And, what are those? Illinois was ranked way higher than we thought that they were going to be ranked. And why is that? It's because people think Luke Altmaier is going to be a great quarterback. And I just don't think people have seen enough from Mailava. I mean, like, you go back to the bowl game against Texas A&M. The rest of the football team played a pretty decent first half, and he was almost single-handedly putting them in position to lose the game with the several pretty poor interceptions that he threw. I personally don't take that as a knock against Mailava. I think Mailava is going to be a very good quarterback. I think people are underrating him, but I just think that, again, we're going back to this, like, people are basing the rankings off of last year, and I just think that the games that he won, were he beat Nebraska, and then they beat UCLA, and then they lost to Notre Dame, and then they beat Texas A&M. Texas A&M is obviously the biggest win in there, and he made some of the most dire mistakes in that game. So I just don't think that media members who, again, look at the quarterback very, very closely, more than any other position, obviously, because that's what dominates so many of the narratives, and that's what gets clicks and all that stuff is your article on if the quarterback is going to be good or not, is like that in his last two games, like, Mailava made some very non-confidence inspiring mistakes. I mean, throwing the back-to-back pick sixes against Notre Dame, and then, kind of the whole first half against Texas A&M, obviously had some very good moments. And I'm hopeful that those very good moments will continue. Really, liked how he looked in the Nebraska game as well. UCLA is a different story, but I think that is as much on the play calling as it is on him. So I just think that that's just what people are looking at, and people are going to kind of hyper focus on those mistakes. And he's had a whole offseason to develop, so I don't think those mistakes are going to be made quite as much. But I just think that they're so eye-catching when they were so eye-catching when they did happen, that I think that that's kind of what a lot of the, especially non-USC media members, remember, is like him making a couple of really boneheaded throws that, were kind of took USC out of the game against Notre Dame, and then were keeping them from winning the game against Texas A&M. And the rest of the team, going to the offense versus defense question, like, the defense was so good. People just in the media seem to be so confident that it's going to be better. They're confident in Dan Lynn, and I think they have reason to be. They're returning enough players, and they're healthy enough, and they've got enough impact transfers and freshmen in that I think that you have reason to be confident in that. But and then even the offense around USC, like, they've got two absolute dogs at wide receiver. They have potentially the deepest running back room they've ever had, which we'll talk about later in the show. And then they've got a couple of great tight ends as well. So it really is just offensive line and quarterback. And I just don't think, like I said, I just don't think your average non-USC media member is super, the non-Josh Pates of the world are super psychoanalyzing the USC offensive line. And if anything, they're probably, they probably have questions about if Mailava can make more of the good throws and not more of the bad ones that they remember the last time they saw him play football. So.
All right, we're still in the segment dealing with USC not being ranked in the preseason AP poll, so that we've gone down some roads about, is this a Lincoln Riley thing? Is this a Jaden Mailava thing? Is this an offensive line thing? But now I want to transition into my soapbox rant. The polls get me hot and bothered because I think they're awful. I think we shouldn't have preseason polls. We shouldn't have any polls until November. Let's just watch football and compare teams and evaluate them for 2 months. And then in November, when it matters, we should be evaluating teams. But so the preseason polls elicited some strong thoughts in me. And folks, if you're paying attention to these polls, and I'm sure that, if you watch Mark Rogers' show here at the Voice of College Football or other shows at VOCFB, there's plenty of poll talk right now. That's the thing. Mid-August, We don't have any games just yet, getting closer, but not yet. So we're talking about polls. It's just the way the sport works. It's the way the news cycle works. So if you're paying attention, I want you to notice two things. You might have already grasped them, but I just want to kind of nail them down right now here at the Voice of College Football on the USC Primetime Live Show. First off, notice how many teams are in this basically the same ranking spot throughout the poll. There are only like 5 or 6 teams that were more than 2 spots different from in the AP poll from their place in the coaches poll. Kansas State 20 and 17, Oklahoma unranked in 1, BYU unranked in 1 but ranked in the other, so that's a difference of at least 3 spots. Ole Miss 15 and 21, Tennessee 18 and 24, and that's it. Like all the other teams were pretty much the same, and especially that Illinois team that USC is facing. Lots of comments about the Illinois game because it really is the first big hinge point moment of this USC season. Illinois just happens to be number 12 in both polls. Like all these voters, 2 different polls, Illinois is 12 exactly in both. Come on now. Arizona State just happens to be 11 in both polls. All these writers, all these coaches, and Arizona State's at 11. Like there's just so much groupthink in these polls. There are 24 teams in both polls, and Oklahoma and BYU were the only teams to be in one poll and not the other. We have a bunch of lemmings here. We have a bunch of sheep. Like the lack of original thinking just tells me that either the coaches are just kind of reading these fed notes or they're just handing it off to their sports information directors, combination of the two. People are just going, and for the writers in the AP poll, they're just kind of going on, well, what the various rankings lists are saying. Come on, man. Just the absolute lack of fresh analysis, which leads me to discount these polls, right? If everyone's just going to say the same thing, well, Alabama's 7 and Oregon's 8, might have been reversed. Arizona State's 11, Illinois is 12, and 9 SEC teams in one poll, 10 SEC teams in the other. Like if no one's willing to step out of the conventional wisdom, like what are people scared? Are people do people not want to offend anybody? So that is just another reason to absolutely hate preseason polls. It's just a lot of groupthink. Just everybody just kind of magically agrees on this industry consensus without kind of having any willingness to be independent or original. Come on, like that is an insult to all of our intelligence. Like if Arizona State was 11 in one poll and then 14 in another, like, okay, so like some people have some different opinions. So you gather 100 people in a room and some people are going to go this way, some people are going to go that way. No, it wasn't like that in these polls. It's everyone marching along the same path. It's like people have been brainwashed. It's like people have been somehow co-opted. Like they're made to fall in line. There's just no dissent. So that's my soapbox rant on these polls. Ethan, I wonder if you have anything to add to what I just said.
I think a little bit of a funny thought that I had while you were talking is I don't even think Kenny Dillingham would rank Arizona State number 11. I mean, if you watch some of his media availabilities, I love Kenny Dillingham, by the way. I think he's a great football coach. I'm excited about what he's doing over at Arizona State. I was really rooting for them in that game against Texas. I think they got screwed over by a couple bad calls, but he just like is kind of the exact opposite of Lincoln Riley in the sense that like he really tells it how it is and is like very like shares that he told his team like you guys aren't even going to go 6-6 if you practice like this, blah blah blah, whatever. It's just like, man, like I haven't even heard from Kenny Dillingham that they deserve to be ranked there. So, and I mean, other stuff feels like this too. Like Boise State, I feel like was just thrown into the rankings because they were a college football playoff team last year, and so it would look weird not to put them in, even though essentially they lost a generational player and they return their quarterback, but they still don't have any real wide receivers. And if any, their wide receiving core is probably worse. Like, it's just like, I feel like people, I think this gets into a general trend with rankings that I've seen. And I see this with everything, it could be, the college football AP poll, or it could be like you ranking what the best and worst Marvel movies are with your friends. Like, I think people are just so afraid to, put a team or a movie or whatever, whatever you're ranking, so much higher than the general public would put it, that it just creates the situation where it's like, okay, people, especially in the media, are, especially today, I think, when it's just so, when it's so accessible to send people backlash and to read the backlash that people are sending, we're not in the era of newspapers anymore. Like, if I, wanted to read every hate comment that was ever written about me, I could, and so could everybody else who works in the media. People are just, I think, more afraid to go against the grain. And so when it comes to things like this, like, you're like, well, like, all the teams that made the playoff should probably be in the rankings unless they've undergone some crazy significant change that suggests that they're going to be terrible, and it's like, and I guess all the teams that got in really high impact transfers and, or made a really high profile coaching change, like, they should probably be considered. And then, you get to a team like USC where it's like, well, we don't really know if their quarterback is established. They return a couple of great guys, but their recruiting class is not super strong. A lot of their transfers are promising, but they're not necessarily big. They don't necessarily have the resume to back it up yet. And then so you just get in kind of the situation where with USC and a lot of other teams, like, you just people are so afraid to be wrong that they, and if they ranked USC in the past few years, they have been wrong. So they're just like, oh, I got to protect my reputation. I can't make any super bold takes. So I just need to kind of lay off. It's kind of actually, it's two extremes. There's those people that, work for like reputable media sources, like people in the AP poll supposedly do. And then there's like the super hot take culture where people just are, dying for clicks. So they try to say the most controversial thing possible just so that, they're like essentially rage baiting you to like elicit a reaction out of you so that you'll comment like, this is crazy. And then they'll make more money off of you. So there's just no, like, it feels like that happy middle ground where people really believe something that is against the grain is becoming more and more rare. And it's either you're only saying it to elicit a reaction, or you're not saying it because you're too afraid to get the reaction. And so I think that's just a product of the current media landscape, to be honest.
All right. So we've talked out the AP poll, USC being unranked, plenty more here on the Voice of College Football coming right up. But first, a word from our sponsor. We'll see you in 45 seconds.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
And we remind you that coming up next week, Mark Rogers' national show here at the Voice of College Football moves to 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So for national college football conversation, including very much the Big Ten, all the other schools alongside USC, you want to catch Mark Rogers now in prime time here at the Voice of College Football. So watch for that, in addition to, of course, USC Primetime Live and Coliseum Chronicles Live here on the USC channel. So next segment on our show, Ethan, special teams kicking game. You have some news and notes that you've been following along from USC preseason camp.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I saw, first and foremost, was just a little note about Makai Lemon and how he'll be used. I think it's really interesting that, so it's Ryan Karchi, he's reporting that Makai Lemon has been the clear top punt returner for USC in camp. And then asked about Makai Lemon being USC's top wide receiver and punt returner, Lincoln Riley said punt returner is one of the most important things on the field. There's nothing anyone would do that would keep us from playing them on punt returner. So, you know, two notes here. Obviously, and then another thing that I saw just to kind of air it all out there is a report that, you know, the number 2 option is Zacharias Williams, who's also projected, you know, to be a starter at wide receiver. Still, you know, not quite as clear cut as Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, still in competition for that, but a lot of people think he's going to be the number 3 guy. So 2 guys that are predicted to start at wide receiver are, all, you know, the 2 candidates to kind of return punts. And I just, you know, it kind of caught my attention because I feel like there's always this debate about using your star players on special teams and, you know, whether that injury risk is really worth the potential reward. You know, no USC fan is going to deny that Makai Lemon is absolutely electric returning the ball, and we saw that a lot last year. And, you know, he kind of ended up taking over for Zachariah Branch despite, you know, the things that he did with the ball in his hands in 2023. So, and that's no small feat, of course. But I personally am a fan of it. I think that, you know, you can't just be so afraid of players getting hurt all the time. Like Makai Lemon could get hurt, you know, walking down the sidewalk on his way to practice. Like it's you know, obviously the injury risk is a little bit higher when it comes to returning punts versus walking down the sidewalk. But I just think that in sports, I always get so frustrated, and, you know, this kind of carries over into other sports in terms of, you know, load management in basketball and, you know, players not trying in specific games that, you know, aren't quote unquote as meaningful, you know, by their definition. And I just think that I always get so frustrated with that because it's like, you know, who says you are or aren't going to get hurt? I think, you know, Makai Lemon could get hurt returning punts. He also could get hurt at wide receiver. I think that if he did get hurt returning punts, like blaming it on Lincoln Riley using him as a punt returner would be kind of silly because, like I said, he could get injured just walking down the street. He could get injured playing wide receiver. So I think that if it helps your team win and Makai Lemon's willing to do it, you should go for it. And so I'm a fan of it personally. Same thing applies with Zacharias Williams, obviously, if he ends up winning that job. But I'm curious if you have any additional or different thoughts on this, man.
2 things. One, I would say is that, you know, let's see if you know, Zacharias Williams can develop into a good punt returner so that you don't have to ask Makai Lemon to do this exclusively or even primarily. The other thing is, if you're going to have Makai Lemon do it only in high leverage situations. You know, if USC's up 2 touchdowns, then you don't have Makai Lemon return punts, right? Then there is no need to subject yourself to that injury risk. But if it's, you know, a 10-10 game at Illinois, 4th quarter, you need something. Well, then of course you go to Makai Lemon, and of course you invite the possibility that your most skilled offensive player can get the ball in his hands in a different way other than the passing game or a set play on offense. But if you're leading by 14, 17, he has no business returning punts. If a game is well in hand, or if the offense is playing really well and there's no acute need to get a long return, then he should sit. So, you know, it's really a lot like managing a pitching staff in baseball, that you use guys in high leverage spots. You try and save them, right? You don't just run them into the ground. You don't overextend them or overexpose them. You use them in the right moments. So that, and having Zacharias Williams being, you know, a competent, solid, quality plan B, those 2 things I think flow together. Because obviously, if you don't have a good plan B and you have a guy who is fumble prone, we've seen it with plenty of special teams units. You know, if the backup just can't cut it, then you have to ride your number 1 pretty much all the time. So having the plan B is really important, provided that exists. In USC just needs to be mixing and matching with Makai Lemon. All right, so special teams more broadly is something we've just been talking about, but now the kicking game specifically, Ethan, your news and notes on that particular front.
Right. So just another quick quote that I saw that really caught my eye. Obviously talking about new USC kicker Caden Chittenden. And so a quote here from special teams coach Ryan Dowdery, where he says that he understands that field goal kicking has been one of the weaker spots the last few years. USC fans know that all too well, obviously. And then he went on to say, Trojans' new kicker Caden Chittenden stood out for the big kicks he made in games as a freshman. Another quote that I personally just absolutely love to see. I think I've watched quite a lot of college football, NFL football in recent years. Jake Moody of the 49ers is someone who comes up in particular. Watching that Texas ASU game that I mentioned as well, like there's clearly some kickers on very high level teams that must be very, very talented in practice and, or in fact are very talented in practice, but don't, honestly just can't cut it in those high leverage moments. Like they don't have the mentality. It genuinely gets to them and they're not able to kind of get over that. And that's not really something that you can teach or practice, right? Like you can teach and practice kicking over and over and over again. But if a player just can't, really rise to the moment and can't get over that mental block, that's difficult. And I think that we've seen that a little bit at USC the last couple of years. And so it's great to hear that, that kind of intangible thing that you can't exactly teach is something that they really prioritize with Caden Chittenden. It's something that I think from youth sports on up is just so true is, you have to trust and you have to develop players who can perform in games. Like performing in practice and performing in games is something else entirely. That's why, sometimes in situations like you talked about, you need to let your backups get reps. You need to, just prepare players for high leverage situations, because it really is a different thing. Players can be practice superstars, and then as soon as 80,000 opposing fans are watching them, they can't kick the ball from 20 yards away anymore. So I'm just glad that they kind of picked up on that with him. I'm glad that that's something that they prioritize. And I mean, he was essentially the best kicker in the entire Mountain West last year. So, it's not like they're saying that about some unknown prospect. He was a great, great kicker. So I'm hoping to see him make some big kicks, because I think that they're going to need him to.
Yeah, to me, and people can disagree on this, and that's fine. Like, I welcome debate on this. Give me a kicker who's automatic inside 45, even if that means he doesn't have a big leg and, might not be reliable from 52, 53, 55. I want the guy who, when you drive inside the 30-yard line, you're getting points. Like, that is the idea of football, that you're driving down the field. If you drive far down the field, you don't quite get in the end zone, you've earned 3 points. 3 points which, if you bank them over the course of a game, they'll add up. We talk about, coaches who go for it or don't go for it, like, Dan Lanning of Oregon, most notably, passing up chip shot field goals that bit him in the backside against Washington 2 seasons ago, not having those 3 points. And Oregon's field goal kicking, very weak in a lot of recent seasons. And, there's the constant debate about, you go for it, do you kick the field goal? And, my philosophy just on that point is, you bank field goals early so that you have them late. Obviously, there are times to go for it, but the value of 3 points, in my mind, has been a little bit undervalued recently. It's kind of like in baseball, how analytics, valued the home run so fully, and in that process, discounted the value of putting the ball in play and not striking out. The Brewers and Blue Jays and other teams are doing really well, not because they're going for the home run and the uppercut and the exit velo. It's because they're putting the ball in play, kind of returning to baseball's roots. And I think football, there's a similar thing where the valuing the analytics has gone so far in one direction that people have forgotten, having 2 or 3 field goals in your pocket over the course of the first 40 to 45 minutes of a game. It's good to have those 3-pointers on your ledger sheet, on the scoreboard going into the fourth quarter. And if you're passing up like 2 or 3 field goals, maybe you go for it at once, but you need to be kicking a few field goals so that you have points in the fourth quarter, so that you're down 6 instead of 10, so that you're down 2 instead of 8, So that's my philosophy in terms of how you approach field goals. But then in terms of a field goal kicker specifically, give me the guy who's going to reward you for driving the ball down the field inside the 30, inside the 25. Give me the guy who's going to be, 12 of 13 inside 42, 43 yards, even if that means he's going to be 1 for 5 over 50. Because over 50, the offense didn't drive down the field enough. I'm not going to lay that on the kicker. I want my kicker to make the kicks he's supposed to make, and that is where USC has fallen short with Dennis Lynch, with other kickers in recent years. Far too many field goals under 40, 41, 42 yards have been missed. So that's where I come down on the conversation. Ethan, is there like a yard line or a distance you feel like needs to be the Mendoza line where, anything underneath it, you just have to be pretty much automatic? Where do you draw your line?
I think 45 is pretty good. I think, and also like automatic on extra points. I think that was like the one thing that Dennis Lynch was pretty good at, was making all of his extra points. That, was the actual field goals where he struggled. So I just think it's, you got to make all your extra points, and then you have to like 45 and in, and then going back to this, like regardless of the situation, like you need to be able to make a 30-yard field goal, when you're playing Northwestern and half the stadium is full, and you need to make a 30-yard field goal when you're playing Oregon and, they're screaming 100 plus decibels in your face. Same thing with Nebraska and some of these other places that really pack the fans in. Like, you just need to have become, so automatic and so unaffected, I guess, by the outside noise and the eyes and stuff, that a 30-yard field goal is a 30-yard field goal, regardless of if you're on the practice field or if you're, in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I just think that's going to be the key. And that's why I like to see quotes like this.
I would just add one final note about, the mental game of place kicking. I'm a big tennis fan. There's a seminal book on sports psychology, not just tennis psychology, but sports psychology, The Inner Game of Tennis, by a guy named Timothy Galway, W-E-Y, not A-Y. If you haven't read it, this is a book that sports psychologists and coaches throughout the decades, 51 years since that book was first published, have used. And it just gets into how mental sports are. And so like the tennis example is, it's easy to hit an ace, big first serve at 1-all in the first set. You're just settling in the match. You're just beginning. You're fully physically fresh. The weight of everything isn't nearly as consequential. But can you hit a serve at 5-6, 30-all, right near the end of the set? You've been on court for an hour. You have to win this set against Novak Djokovic or Carlos Alcaraz. Can you hit the big serve then? And that's really the parallel with field goal kicking. Can you thing that you do in practice all the time, can you do it when it really counts, when all the pressures in the world is on your shoulders, when all the eyes in the stadium are on you? That it's the mental game. It's not a matter of physical prowess. It's a matter of being the mental fortress to be able to handle those kinds of moments. All right, we still have one more segment left on our show. It's going to deal with USC play calling. But first, another word for our sponsor. Hey, if you want to be an informed college football bettor, just stay here at the Voice of College Football. And that's what this next 60-second advertisement is all about here at the VOCFB.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole showstopper. 7 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And just in case you're curious, I have not arrived at a really firm opinion on where I'd set the spread and total for USC versus Missouri State, but during game week, that's certainly going to come up. Ethan and I will certainly be making our picks for every USC game during the season relative to the spread and the money line here at the Voice of College Football. So something fun for all of you. Don't take us as preachers of gospel certainty, but we're going to have some fun because who doesn't want to, lay a little side cash, provided that it's legal. Cough, cough, John Mateer, cough, cough. All right. So, Ethan, final segment. You have some interesting insights into USC's play calling and what's happening in preseason camp.
Yeah. So I saw a little something about how, in some of the practices, USC's been lining up multiple running backs in the same backfield. So it'll be like Wayman Jordan and Brian Jackson, in kind of an option play. And, that's kind of popped up in some of the highlights. There's a, really popular video of Wayman Jordan, running in practice that was making the rounds and that everyone was kind of sharing and getting excited about Wayman Jordan. And if you look really closely, you can see that in the backfield, there was also Brian Jackson there as well, kind of ready to take the option if that's what happened. So, and people are basically saying that it is kind of reminiscent of when Lincoln Riley had Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine at Oklahoma, and they're wondering if he's going to kind of get back to that sort of offensive play calling, which, I think would be really interesting. And with the depth that they supposedly have at running back, that could be really beneficial. But so, a little bit of a new look, maybe kind of answering some of the pleas we've had for the last several months about running the ball a bit more, and just also changing things up a bit, not just calling creative pass plays per se, but getting a little bit more creative in the run game. That's something, in addition to not calling the run enough, that was another thing that people have been frustrated with about USC is just kind of the uncomplicated, very straightforward run play calling. So I just think that is all encouraging and something to watch in these first few games for sure is if they try that out.
This is a conversation we've had in previous weeks, but now this is kind of a new layer. Okay, they're practicing some option plays, so it puts a little meat on the bone. It gives us a little bit of an indication of where this thing's going. So that package is going to be part of the reality for Jaden Mayava. So we've kind of talked in general terms, Ethan, over the past month or so, in terms of how much do you throw, how much do you run, but here it's a little bit different. It's how much should it be, quote unquote, traditional running game versus option running game, how the mixture should be, and how many specialty plays in the playbook do you show in these first 3 games: Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue. Michigan State, I think Michigan State needs to be taken more seriously than Purdue. Not that Purdue shouldn't be taken seriously, but I view Purdue as pretty much, a team that USC should trample, period. Michigan State I wouldn't quite put in the same category, but of course all 4 games until Illinois are games that should easily go into the USC win column. But because of this soft on-ramp this season, just how much should USC and Lincoln Riley be showing in the playbook in the first 3 games? How do you obviously want to practice certain things in live game situations, but you don't want to give Illinois and Brett Bielema and his staff too much to look at on film. You want to save the really good stuff, keep it in the liquor cabinet instead of displaying it right out there. So what's the mix relative to traditional run game versus option packages?
I think the first like 3-4 games, like you mentioned, I almost don't want to see any option plays at all, just because, like you said, I want to keep that one under wraps for sure. And I also think that it's just a great way for you to see how, these running backs kind of stand up as the primary back, as the only guy in the backfield, as the more traditional guy, because at some point, USC has these three very talented running backs, but you kind of want to have a guy who's the go-to guy in the clutch situations. And, when you absolutely need to get the running game going against these tough defenses. So I think especially in a season where they're seemingly a lot more even in terms of skill and potential compared to the last few seasons where there's a clear-cut number one guy, I think you just want to see like how they kind of pound the rock to kind of put it that way, the first few games. And then when, like you said, when it gets to Illinois, then you surprise the Illinois coach with an option play. But that doesn't mean neglecting to practice that, because you obviously don't want to run the option play and then Mailava makes a poor decision, or, it's the players just don't know how to run it and it's too complicated or whatever. But I think that that's something that you can kind of hammer home in practice. If you want to run it, once or twice, do it in the very first game, the Missouri State game, because, Illinois is going to be a lot more concerned with watching tape on the two Big Ten games, on the Purdue game and on the Michigan State game, than they are going all the way back to the Missouri State game and watching tape on that, because it's a little bit more about how USC is matching up against the Big Ten, matching up against the Big Ten on the road, et cetera, matching up against Big Ten size. So yeah, if you're gonna run any fancy plays at all, I say do it in that first game especially, and the first two games in particular. Maybe you want to just kind of run a little fun one by Clay Helton to let him know who's really having fun here, and who's coaching a really small program now that has no chance of making the college football playoff. But yeah, just not too much, just to prove the concept, show the players that they can do it in the game once or twice, and do it early. Don't do it in Purdue, or don't do it against Michigan State unless you absolutely have to, unless the Michigan State game gets closer than people think it's going to be. So yeah, I just say not too much, maybe once or twice, but just see who can stand up as the number one back and the solo back in the backfield as well. I think that's a little bit more important.
Yeah, just get a little taste. Don't eat too much, but just get a little taste. Make sure it's just properly seasoned here at the Voice of College Football. All right, folks. So we'll see you next Thursday as we continue with it's really our last off-season show, because then the season starts on the 23rd, and then USC game week is the following week. So there will be some schedule changes once we get into the season and game week, but next week is Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So for Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. Thank you so very much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like each video that Ethan puts out, get the notification reminder, and of course, share these videos with your friends. We'll see you next week at the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football.